Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on preparing for FDA inspections in a digitalized landscape, a CSA perspective. We're just going to give a minute or two for the rest of the attendees to come on by, and we'll be starting shortly. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Again, welcome. Today, we will be hosting the webinar on preparing for FDA inspections in a digitalized landscape, a CSA perspective. And this webinar is brought to you by Connect with partnership with Compliance Group and the FIXA team. We're very proud to say that every single one of the presenters today and the moderator are actually part of the FIXA team. So Connect is always very excited to just keep on building those relationships with industry personnel. A few things that you should know before we start getting into the content of it. My name is Julian Sanchez, and I am a project coordinator at Connect. And we here at Connect are very proud leaders in educational programs on the validation and GMP life science industries. And on that commitment, on that content sharing, you are all now members of Connect Inside, which means that you have to your disposal SOPs, tools and templates, session recordings, webinar recordings, and all other articles and stuff available in our website. And so please be on the lookout for an email, a post-webinar email with information on how to get that newly acquired membership going. Our 2025 calendar is already up and running, and we're very excited to just bring you a couple of the Connex's crown jewels, like Validation University in Philadelphia in March and CSA CSB University in San Diego in December, but also some very new and exciting programs for us like Microbiology University and some others. So if you or anybody that you know are interested or could benefit from attending any of these conferences, please feel free to reach out at info@connect.org. Also, we still have one in-person program in the US for this year, and it's CSA University. And if you're interested on the topics discussed on this webinar, I highly suggest checking our website for this conference, since there's going to be a couple of topics that you're probably going to be very interested to hear over there too. And we're hosting this on the Washington, D.C. area, December 10 to 12. So again, if we are offering some promotional discounts for all the attendees that are here present on this webinar. So please feel free to reach out to info@connect.org to get your registration going. We're also extremely proud of our partnership with Temple University. We actually have a program with their master's RAQA program. Attendees can come to, as students that attend Temple University can come to our conferences, take an exam after the conference is done, and be credited with 1.5 credit units towards their master's program. And Connect has donated nearly $170,000 US to said program. And with that said, I am going to give the floor to Khaled from Compliance Group. Compliance Group is a trusted partner for FDA-regulated businesses, full spectrum service provider to life sciences and cosmetic industries. And yeah, everybody is muted, so if you can go ahead and unmute yourselves whenever you feel ready to start speaking.
Great. Excuse me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you, Julian, for the introduction. And just a note on that last thing you put out there on the event. This team will be actually in DC and will be presenting on various topics from AI to change management to CSA, CSV. So please look for us.
Hey, Colin.
Alrighty. Yes, sir.
You're not in presentation mode.
Thank you, sir. So you can see yourself here instead of me, right?
It's just full screen mode. It's not. There you go. Yeah.
All right. Oops. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. Today's topic, apologies, guys. This is what happens when you're dealing with one screen here. We're not used to this anymore. Okay. This topic has been a fairly hot topic, talking about preparing. And again, we're saying here FDA inspection, but technically it's regulators, right? This is not just about the FDA, as much as we love our FDA, but it is, as we walk through the topic and the questions and the pain points, you're going to realize this is a global concern that everyone is asking the same question, right? And I'm just very lucky to be a member in the FIXA team with these subject matter experts that they agreed to do this topic here and discuss it today and give whatever information, as much information as we can. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start actually by introducing or turning it to each panelist to introduce themselves and their credential. I'll start with myself, Caleb Musalli. I'm the Executive Vice President of Corporate Development and Operation at Compliance Group. Compliance Group has been a service provider, consultant services, technology solutions, staffing for over 8+ years. And we've been collaborating with the FDA and many other pharma, biotech, and med device. And I'm actually in Chicago. However, today I'm already in New York. So hello from New York. All right, I'm gonna turn it to my panelists and we'll start with Margie. If you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Margie Henley. I'm the director of CSA at Taiho Oncology. I've been in this role for about 2 years, and we've just recently gone through a CSA transformation from CSV to CSA mindset, and we are in the process of going fully digital with validation for validation tools. Prior to this, I was a quality assurance person at a previous company, and was doing CSA CSV quality assurance on the lab side. Right now, we are doing clinical applications and such. So it's a wide gamut. I've gone from labs all the way into pure IT applications. So it's been an interesting ride. Hopefully I can answer questions. Next.
Thank you, Margie.
Yep.
Roy?
Hey, everybody. My name is Roy Devine. I'm the global process owner for computer system validation for all non-device software at BD. I've been in the industry for a little over 30 years, doing work through pharma and med device, the entire drug development lifecycle activities. And we've been at BD, I've been part of a 5-year program to get everybody harmonized onto one way of validating software across the company. And we've done some great work in implementing that. And we use a risk-based approach globally. To be honest, I've been using risk-based validation before it was cool, since about 2002, when it was a really innovative piece of it. But CSA has energized the ability to actually use critical thinking and a risk-based approach to focus our testing much more effective. So thanks to allow me to be here, and I'm happy to share what I can.
Thank you, Roy. Ken?
Sure. Ken Shitamoto, been in industry since I think 1993. Started on the business side, manufacturing, quality assurance, primarily in the GMP, GCP sides of the house, and also on the service provider. Ended up in IT in the end, and I head up privacy, quality assurance, quality engineering at Gilead.
Thank you, sir. I guess that's the last. Daniel?
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Walter. I am a policy analyst with the Case for Quality team in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health here at FDA. I've worked here for 16 years in a number of capacities, including in compliance and in review, device review. Prior to that, I was in industry as a contract validator for 8.5 years. You could say that I'm the FNF in FIXA, and I'm with the government, and I'm here to help.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And of course, he is the FIXA FDA representative, and thank you for being there and making the time to be with us. Of course, I appreciate you joining us today as well to give us your thought. Again, this team, I always like to present this. Some of these folks have moved on to other careers. Some of them won the lottery. But let me tell you, every one of these individuals worked really hard to develop something and contribute something within the CSA draft guidance. Why are we talking about CSA? Well, we're preparing for digitalization landscape. Well, CSA was one of the initiatives in the view of the FDA to encourage automation and digitize all the legacy paper processes that we have. So CSA should really have paved the road for us, and it's been going on for the past almost 6-7 years and counting. And I think we're at a very good point with CSA where many organizations are really taking advantage of it. I think this is going to be a segue for me that I always like to ask Daniel, since he monitors what's going on with the draft guidance. The last we heard was on the B list as final draft or final guidance. So Dan, could you please share with us anything you know in addition to what we talked about maybe a couple months ago?
So that's accurate. It was put out on the B list, and what that means is that if there's a workload that A list material or A list guidances would get priority for processing, and that B list would be next. So we wait forward for that. That's accurate as stated. Otherwise, the draft, we are diligently working towards making it final. The comments are still live and public, and you can see it if you go to view the draft guidance. Those comments are still live and active and can be discussed. That's the extent of what I can say at this time.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Just having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Please bear with me. Okay, I should be just fine after this. And I'm going to show my screen again. Okay, we should be back in business. Great. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. All right, our topic today, preparing for FDA inspection, has always been a critical challenge for regulated industry. We all have had the pain and the agony. I'm a little bit emotional here, but the increasing adoption of digital technology has added new layers of complexity. As organizations transition to automated systems, cloud-based solutions, they often face uncertainties about how to align these innovations with FDA requirements, and again, with regulatory requirements. What I noticed and what we've noticed in the industry, there are common pain points, right? I'm not going to list them all because I'm sure you're going to have probably multiple lists to go over, right? So today's discussion will really let us delve into these challenges and examine the strategies to hopefully navigate through FDA inspection in a rapidly digitalizing world. Why this topic today? I think here I just want to put a little bit of announcement. I've been fortunate enough to be a member of the ISPE GAMP community, and ISPE GAMP is working on a good practice guide for digital validation tool. And it's a very timely good practice guide. Reason being, lots of questions have been going around. Well, what do I present to an inspector? What is the system of record? How? And the what and how and why, there's so many questions around it. That GPG have been contributed by, goodness, dozens of individuals from the ISPE community, and hopefully will be coming out in the beginning, sometime in January. We will be having a webinar, an ISPE webinar, January, God, can I please say the right one? January 14. We'll share that information with everyone attending here because, again, more information is helpful. We all need the information, so we all get consistent information, whether from regulators or from organizations that issue guidances. All right, so what I'm going to start here, I really want to make this interactive between the panelists because I'm going to pause a little bit, come back in a little bit, but I would like, I've witnessed this team getting really heated discussions about these topics. And I would love for you to see that, just like I see it almost every other Friday with this team. So what we're going to start out with, just a few questions let me just move this out of here. And of course, I'm going to start with Daniel because he's the government and he deserves the right to get the first question. Daniel, is the FDA equipped to understand digital technology and modify its regulatory models to accommodate this technology? That's a hefty question, but
it's actually two questions.
Yes, sir.
Is the FDA equipped to understand digital technology? Yes, and modify its regulatory models to accommodate this technology? We don't have to, and I'll come back and explain both. So are we equipped to understand digital technology? Yes, and this is happening for a variety of reasons, none of which I think would be any surprise. Much like in any form of employment at all, as technology evolves, the employer seeks to adopt technologies, and then it is incumbent on the employees to learn and adapt to the technologies. We are no different. And as things become aware, and we have the added burden of not just knowing when technologies become available, but we have to understand how they impact us as employees, how they impact us as reviewers, and how they impact public policy. So now we have a much greater impetus to lean into the understanding of what new technology is. And I think you can see it. There are a number of different avenues that even within FDA that we take, from the office of our chief scientist who's leaned into even quantum computing all the way down. And where it is universal, we try to make it shared amongst the agency. Where it is specific to a local area within the agency, we focus there. So to that end, we even our iTeam Hub, an endeavor that we opened at the beginning of this year, which was about the automation or adopting advanced technologies and using it as a test lab for us to understand our own regulatory science. These are elements that we are leaning into to bring our understanding and train our staff so that we can have better conversations with industry moving forward. So yes, we're very much equipped and always equipping to understand digital technology. Modifying our regulatory models to accommodate, the beautiful thing is that our regulatory model is marvelously flexible. It is very vague. If you look into the actual language of the regulation, it just says you must have a plan and you must show that it's validated. You must validate every now and then. You must audit. You must have things documented, who, what, where, and so on. Those things are all there, but the meat and potatoes is wide open. And as a result, what you do within your space can be accommodated. So to this end, when we talk about a lot of the technologies we look to adopt or we're thinking about moving forward with, we're actually within the boundaries of what we do right now. We don't have to change anything.
Thank you. I saw a little smirk on your face, Ken, when he said it's pretty vague. Did you want to interfere here?
No, I completely agree with it. I mean,
Right.
and it's a good thing it is, because it doesn't change, and it has to keep up with the changing technologies and processes and practices, right, in principle. So it should be like Part 11, 2003. We will revisit Part 11. That was in 2003 in scope and application, and we still haven't gone back to it. I think the flip side to that last point is industry seems to be the one who doesn't understand the model and is self-inflicting requirements that don't exist, that are actually preferences that largely are people from the old guard who, Daniel described that inquisitive or that need to learn. The people who aren't looking to learn are clinging to the old models when there are no requirements. So that's the smirk.
Right. Yeah,
I figured
if I
it
could,
Please. Yes, Roy, go ahead.
if I could, I think to both their points, the concept of having data integrity and trust in the data you're presenting hasn't changed. It won't change. The technical vehicle you use to enable that and the way you deploy it may update, but the underlying principle that you have information, you have a way to show that it has fidelity, that it's correct and it's accurate, and a piece of it is the same request they've had since the beginning. It's not like it changes based on what format you send the data in. If you have a good digital signature, that is the same place it was necessary when you had a wet ink signature. It's not that there's nothing magic about paper that made it easier to have trust. In fact, a tightly secured, well-designed system lets that flow be more effective and allows you to review stuff quicker. So everybody wants to adopt it. I mean, the regulators don't want to sift through paper. It's not like they get paid by the pound of document they review. They want to be able to have the most quick and effective way to get to the information. And that's why we're all leaning towards using the digital innovations better. But it doesn't change the underlying principle. Still got to be able to trust the information you provide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Margie, any comments on this?
The only thing I would add is that when we say the old guard, it's not necessarily someone who's been in the industry for a long time. Sometimes it's a matter of someone who's been taught by someone who's been in the industry for a long time. So I've seen some young people who have an old style philosophy, and I've seen some experienced folks who have a very open mindset. So I would caution, and I would definitely be a big advocate of continuous learning. There's a lot to learn, and if you really think about it, there's a lot of things that are going on from a regulatory perspective worldwide, not just from FDA. There are a lot of things that you need to keep up on and keep aware of. And regulations are constantly changing, guidelines are constantly changing, and you need to be aware of what's going on, and you need to be flexible. So I think that open mindset is really what you need to have to help in this.
Well said. Thank you for that. that reminds me of my story why I left IT and I went into compliance, because I wanted to see what the other side think about IT. And thank God I ended up with Fix It. Moving on. What are the most obvious changes that have occurred in the past 3 to 5 years from an inspection readiness or logistics perspective? And am I gonna target anybody else, or you got?
I'll take that on, call it. I think that the tools and the tools and technologies have really enabled and accelerated. You know, case in point, we were having a remote audit and we didn't have well, some of the attendees were remote and we had a Zoom session. You know, we use Zoom to scribe it because you can turn on captioning, so I no longer need a person in the room, and it can automatically scribe it. The back room could see the transcripts as well. So the tools and technologies are really enabling us to move faster, understand our vulnerabilities, right, where we're at, because now we have better, once everything's digital, then you can start accessing it. You can start surveying it. You can look for missing things. You know, you could start looking at files and doing analysis on the metadata, things like that before you didn't necessarily have, or is difficult to do because you had physical objects. From a logistics, you know, we use ALM, and you know, I don't have to worry about a protocol going missing. I have workflow rules to ensure that processes are followed. So the stuff that just dragged you down for just human error, those sort of things are minimized. So I think as the tools and technologies are there, as the culture shifts, and as the next generation comes in, more immersed in technology, I think we're just going to go faster and faster and faster.
So I would agree with that. I would agree with that, Ken, but I think there are other, I wouldn't say legacy systems or legacy companies out there, but I would also say there are still companies that are in transition. You know, there still might be companies out there that have their validation documents in binders and they still have not yet scanned them in to even make them, you know, digital in some kind of digital form. So, and what are the rules? What are the guidelines? What do they say about when you're transitioning something from a physical paper document into something that's electronic? You know, it's those fundamentals. Those are data integrity questions that you really need to consider as you are making those changes, because those are the things that can trip you up if you haven't done something properly, if you haven't transitioned something properly, if you haven't planned it out. If you're not including it in with your, even just validating your validation tool, if you're not including what the basics, you could really trip yourself up. So it's really, the industry has changed in the past 3 to 5 years, how we audit, how audits are managed. You know, most things now are mostly either remote or electronic, whereas 3 to 5 years ago, a lot of it was paper, still paper. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, to add to your, I think this is one of, you know, just looking at various surveys, this is one of the most critical issue here. If you're hybrid and you're trying to, again, present documentation, you've got some in your digital validation tool and some on paper. How is someone like Daniel is going to react to this, right? When you probably, when you did migrate from paper process, you missed out on all the revision. You only have the latest revision. Again, what is your strategy to migrate from paper to paperless, right? I think it you know, it all adds up, right? And Daniel, any recommendation here? You want to give us a little bit guidance on the fly?
So I'll be maybe kind, I think, or at least try to understand. We all understand there's a human element to this as well. These things are not automated and done in a vacuum. If leadership of your company says we're moving from analog to digital, we're moving from paper to online, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't happen instantly, and it doesn't happen without flaw, and it doesn't happen even if you plan it perfectly, that there are going to be things we didn't account for. And I say that perfectly would mean there were things you counted for everything. But even sometimes in the perfect plan, there was something that gets missed. It isn't that you need to do it perfectly from start to finish. It isn't that you can't be in the middle of a transition. We understand that these are things that happen in the normal course of business. It's more of a matter of, this is where we are, this is how we got here, here's the mistakes that we found along the way, here's how we've addressed them. Here, in the case of the one just presented, say I put in a new revision, my digital starts with the new revision. As long as you have the old revision that's available by paper and you still follow the old paper, I need it within 72 hours or whatever the investigator requests, you're still meeting the criteria. It is not an absolute you must or else. So we do have a heart. It's more about, did you commit yourself to something, not do it, and are unable to explain it? That's a little bit more of a problem.
If I could add to that, my experience in the 30 odd years I've been in the industry have been that if you can explain the rationale as to why you are where you are, and there's a good, reasonable justification of what it is, most of the inspectors are that I've worked with have been pretty reasonable. They're not looking to find nitpicky little things and say, hey, this is a major issue. If you can say, this is how we did the transition, here's where we are in our conversion, this is how we converted it. We had a hiccup here, but this is how we addressed it. We still have, we can still prove we have fidelity. They'll accept it and move forward. I mean, the whole goal is that the audit is not supposed to be an adversarial experience where everybody's trying to shoot each other. It's how do we get to the truth? How do we make sure we have trust in the data? How a piece of it. And if you go in with that attitude, it's a lot more of a pleasant experience than it can be, I think, in some of the horror stories that people hear about the inspections in the past. So.
Makes sense. So switching off a little bit. So again, many organizations today, they're implementing computer software assurance. There is the concern, okay, now technically they have less documentation, new strategy of validation. Again, I mean, the answer could be obvious, yes, but I guess what is really the less obvious and more subtle changes required to present that your CSA program is solid and from a digital perspective, not on paper, right? So any thoughts on that? Experience, situations?
So I'll start. I think one of the things is making sure that your internal teams have a good grasp on how the functional risk assessment or how the determination of what level of risk you're using for your risk-based approach piece of it is very important. That they know where to get the official copies of stuff, that you don't have version control issues in your digital environment, and they know how to explain it to an auditor or an inspector. Again, there always has been the ability to make a risk-based decision of how you did it. If you can't explain why you made the decision, or you don't have a justification why you did it, that's when you trip yourself up. And if you wrote an internal procedure that says, I'm going to do X all the time, even if doing Y would have been more efficient, you said you were going to do X all the time. You need to explain why you're not doing it that way. So fix your internal procedures so they don't disallow your ability to use rational thought and make a better approach. It isn't necessarily just that it's less documentation. It's supposed to be better documentation and more focused testing. The goal is not to try and drown people in evidence. The goal is to try and give them the right evidence so they can get to the answer quicker. And every experience I've ever had is if you can get the inspector the answer they want quickly without having to sift through 7 feet worth of information, they're happier. They get to the answer quicker, and you can get a much more positive outcome of the inspection.
I guess, is it really quicker to do inspection doing digital validation tool or paper, in your experience?
For me,
Well,
so
we're the oddities.
no. I understand, but you could have that could have
Sure.
been asked as an audit question or whatnot. It's different. It's neither quicker nor slower. It's different, and the reason is because it's about the rationale for why. You don't. If you're doing a standard CSV waterfall, everything everywhere all the time approach, that's fine. That's straightforward. That's an easy approach to write down because you can write it in stone and it will still exist to the day. It is backed up by a bunch of different, and the proof that you need for it is straightforward. For CSA, it requires a lot more for why you are making choices to not do or to do things differently than you would have based on the level of risk. And so for you to do things according to a risk basis, you need to lean more into how you got to your risk determinations. You actually have to put things up front, things like risk policies, where you identify your risk documentations up front. You set the foundation so that when you do get to a CSA moment and you do say, well, I see you didn't do this element. Oh yeah, well, we don't have to because it's low risk. How do you know it's low risk? Well, we follow and you trace them back into the system that you've set up. So that first couple of audits where you're trying to understand how you got to the risk base is going to be a challenge. But once the system is in place, the future executions should become a lot more straightforward. I'm going to also clarify, just because a CSA is, it is less rote work than CSV. It doesn't mean it's less work. It may mean less documentation. It may mean more. It depends on how it's being applied based on the level of risk for the application that you have in front of you. So CSA is not, you do this, you do less. I mean, that may be an outcome, could be a very beneficial one, but you do have to do the hard work of getting through why we're doing what we're doing up front to set the stage for potentially less.
So just jumping into this, I think a while back, a guy reports to me, heads of my quality engineering function, Vincent. We submitted a interpretation of CSA to Cisco when he was still at FDA to review. One of the things that we called out was, CSA is an overemphasis on documentation, reduction to documentation. And Cisco, in his response, he acknowledged it. He goes, but that's where industry is, that was the pain point that industry complained about, so they focused on it. Right. So the less obvious and more subtle changes is the reality is you need to focus on the quality of the system. Every risk-based approach is perfect as long as the system works. And right now, everyone's like, doing less documentation, but you need to have something leaning into it on the quality engineering side, on the software engineering side, to ensure that you can do that. Our approach is we run a non-GXP test cycle, right? So we have real testers, not people that focus. Like the primary skill set for a validation purpose is to write well, to write nice deviations, to write nice summary reports. Whereas a tester, their intent is, find as many defects as possible to prove my worth. I need to find the most critical ones. I'm going to do all these edge cases and conditions. So that leads to a better quality system. Just telling someone to do exploratory and they don't know what exploratory means. Exploratory is actually a lot of work if you look at it. Understanding, the difference between test design, test documentation, right? And understanding the difference between tools and methods. If there's a lot that's kind of merged and not so obvious, I would tell people, like, less obvious, more subtle changes is to look at the literature in software engineering such that your methodology is based on something more than, hey, I just want to reduce documentation. Because that's where the people who misunderstand the intent of CSA try to cut corners, and they would try to cut corners regardless of systems. And then the other thing is, it's not really a transition, right? This is CSX. It's the XSX, they call it. And it is the same thing. It's one and the same, you know, and it's all about ensuring the quality, ensuring that the system actually works, because our job is to protect people end of day.
So there's one more thing I wanted to add on this, is that's not necessarily related to your validation or CSA. It's all of the supporting systems that go into what you're doing. So one of the things that we do very aggressively at our company is it's how we audit our vendors and how we have a risk-based approach even to our vendors. Because if they don't know what they're doing and we're relying on their documentation, it actually creates more work on our end to validate. If we can rely on our vendors and if we are asking them the right questions, if they are doing their development properly and we know that, that makes our life a lot easier, and we can rely on the work that they do, and we can actually focus on what we need to focus on, our user requirements, what is the intended use of the system, and making sure that our UAT is done properly, and we don't have to worry so much about everything else. So I think it's a balance of what you do in-house, what you do out of house, how you combine your skills and your vendor skills, and making sure all of that is harmonious. And I think that's one of the, you know, it's not always an obvious thing, but it is something that is important, I think, to the CSA philosophy.
Well said. The next couple of questions, I feel like you guys somewhat have really addressed them in discussions. The one on how can organizations ensure compliance while leveraging digital tools and automated systems. We see in practice that there is a struggle, right? Many, they're implementing new ALM tools. Well, I don't need to validate it. This is really low, lower risk. And again, we go back to the conversation that you just mentioned about risk. You know, how do you actually, draft, a risk assessment, and what do you mean by low, medium, high, etc. And Margie, I will go to you. That do you see in your organization? And really, this question I would love for Margie, Roy, and Ken to just comment on it, or give me a short answer on it, if possible.
Sure. I would say our company, we look at 4 different elements for risk. Like I said earlier, just recently, we do vendor risk assessment, making sure our vendors are proper. They're on they're audited on a regular basis. We know that they are high risk, low risk, medium risk, whatever. That going in, then what we say is the second piece is the initial risk assessment. Coming in before we even validate it. What is the intended use? What does our business say? What does IT say? What does quality say? What is that intended use? Because you can have a Viva Vault that you're using just as an archive, which the concept of that is lower risk than if you're going to be putting your clinical trial data, your clinical trial information in there. So the intended use of your system is very important. And that helps to modulate how you assess the risk of that particular system. Then our next piece is how we do risk assessments on the functional requirements. Is something by the vendor? Has it already been tested by our vendor? And that's where our audit of our vendor comes in place, because if we know that we can rely on them, we know that they've tested something, all we have to do is verify something. We don't have to test it to death. So that's where we modulate what our testing is done. And then our last piece is it's eluding me right now. Yeah, so sorry about that.
You're good. Roy, you want to help out?
It's also the documentation. If we have something that's on high risk, if it's something that's category 5, we're going to be making sure we have all the documents in a row, rather than if it's something that's strictly a COTS system, category 3, we can have minimal documentation, or we can supplement with our vendors. So we audit our vendors. We do an upfront initial risk assessment, which includes our intended use. We modulate our documentation, and we make sure which requirements are tested by the vendor versus which ones are configured, and we want to test them more. So that's basically our approach on how we validate our systems.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
That's awesome. Roy, anything to add?
So yeah, just a couple quick comments I guess I would make is one is that, you know, leveraging vendor documentation makes a lot of sense if you can verify that the vendor documentation is good enough to leverage, right?
Right.
And that goes back to the audit. Not every vendor is created equal. Not every piece of software is created equal.
Very true.
We look at it as basically, you know, risk in a couple different dimensions: patient safety, product quality direct list, business continuity, regulatory direct risk, and then technical complexity. And COTS is not always simpler than a custom software. You can write one piece of code that will, you know, unmask an entire clinical trial that could be a horrible impact, but it's a real simple piece of code. But you need to understand the actual risk. So I think the intrinsic risk of the overall piece of it is you have to understand what your intended use is and what your system is supposed to do. You have to understand from just a software engineering perspective, is this designed well? Do I know I can have trust and fidelity of the data? And I think to Ken's point earlier, CSA is not necessarily less work. It actually takes more thought up front as to why you're doing what you're doing versus just throwing 1,000 scripts at it. It doesn't help, because if you didn't understand the logic in the 1,000 scripts, you're going to not understand it before. But if you, I mean, even in the like the voluminous older approach of testing everything at the same level, you still had failures of the logic because you didn't test the right thing. If your requirements aren't good, none of this stuff works. So I think one of the biggest things is focusing on quality by design, you know, privacy by design, security by design, making sure that you're either building or identifying your requirements during systems up front so they work better, so that when you're focusing it, you can look at what happens if I have a degenerative case of data coming into my system that wouldn't be the norm. That's something that you're going to catch right away if you're spending all your time doing just rote scripts that don't make any logical sense. I mean, a lot of times you take a traceability matrix, you see all the different places you impacted, and you find out that you've retested the same function 400 times. Great, but you didn't test the 2 that actually are going to impact a problem because they weren't caught because nobody knew the design well enough to know what to look for. So it's focusing more on the design element up front before than it is the piece of it. You know, it's sort of the adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you fix the design flaw up front when you're doing it for quality by design, you don't have to find it in the UAT because you've already resolved it. Your UAT should be, what am I going to use in my normal operational environment? How do I piece of it? And then start trying things about how the system is going to work interactive with other applications to look a piece of it. But you wouldn't have run into those problems if you'd already fixed it before when you did the design review up front. So that's.
Hey, Colin,
Thank you.
just gonna chime in real quick on this one.
Please.
Real quick. I'll go back to Daniel, and then I'll be a little inflammatory just to drive discussion. Daniel's point from compliance is a low bar. Dan, you know, you kind of say it's open. You got to do it. One company can just say like, hey, I'm going to risk assess the entire thing away, and the other company can just do volumes and volumes of work. Both are compliance. Right? That's a low bar for there. And then like look at validation itself. I just said someone can risk assess the entire thing away, and someone can do volumes of work. It is a risk record. It is a record you can do retrospectively. You say, yeah, we should have validated. Let's do this after the fact and generate that documentation. You can't do that to other records. Right? A record that you can recreate at that level in that context. And then let's start thinking of it. So I have the system. I have the validation system that's going to store. And then I'm going to use these tools. It's like, how many levels of indirection do you want to go by extending like predicate rules? There's not going to be a predicate rule on that tool. Right? The requirement that's driving it is I have to validate it. These others, you need to make sure they work. That's your own internal processes. It's only when you get big that you start building. Like I worked with this one company that they're getting their first, you know, customer audit, and they're like 5 people in a living room. The systems and the things that we built then were just as compliant, but way more efficient than the larger companies that I've worked at. Because compliance is a little better. You use the tool because the tool works, right? And then this will help you leverage it, but you just have to understand the rationale. You need to understand what is compliance. You need to understand what actually impacts quality of the system or the final product quality that actually impacts the patient, impacts the drug quality or product quality, to be more agnostic. Anyway, I'll stop.
Great. All right. I'm going to step back into digitalized environments. So data integrity, right? And I think you touched on it a little bit, Margie, early on when you were talking about from papers. And again, thank you, Daniel, for providing the input. Yes, you need to have a good, solid project, migrate it, get into all of that. Is there really anything that the obvious, right, that we need to address about data integrity? Is there anything that you see from migrating from paper to paperless that could impact data integrity or something that we miss as an industry?
So I'm going to go on. I'm going to do this. I'm also going to make a callback to Ken's comments about Part 11 needing to be revisited from 2003, because I think that's actually a good lead in here. If you think about Part 11, and many of you on the call may not have been around when Part 11 was first implemented. Many on this panel very much were. Part 11 in 1997 and then subsequently 2002-3 was an entirely different universe when you consider the systems of the day. The systems of the day, most of industry was working in either a Windows 95, 98 environment, possibly even a DOS environment or a Windows 3.1 environment, where anybody with a modicum of skills could get in and hack signature blocks and accesses. And as a result, data integrity was kind of loose. In the interceding 20 years, industry has clamored for solutions, and the producers of products that handle data have largely risen to the occasion. They've said, Part 11, we got you. Here's how we're going to make this Part 11 compliant. And yes, there's been some validation. Is it really Part 11 compliant or not? But the bottom line is that nowadays, we're so Part 11 compliant that we're talking about two-factor authentication on apps on your phones for personal use. It is an entirely different place. Data integrity, on the other hand, the risks of data integrity have always remained. What are your risks for not having data integrity? Well, it depends on the data. What is the data that is no longer has that integrity? And then what does that mean to you? It depends. Clinical trial, clinical application, obviously that impugns your product. Manufacturing data obviously impugns your product. There are others that may or may not. But to the point, should Part 11 be revisited? And I'm speaking here just within this is not me speaking for the agency in its totality. If I was going to say, I would think that at least we should consider opening the door again to look at the universe 25 years later after the use of Part 11 and say, do we really need to say anything? And if so, is it a good time? Because now we've had an entire generation of regulated manufacturing of product. What's happened? Are we better? Are we worse? Do we need to nudge in a direction or not? And I would argue that the issues with data integrity are less in a localized factory and more external.
Yes.
Are people accessing your data? Under Part 11, this would be considered an open system issue that would leave you in a state of concern. Are your suppliers being honest with their data, whether clinical or vendor supply or whatever have you? And then internally, do you have a reason to doubt the integrity of the data you're receiving? And that is almost tinfoil hat level. Do you believe that your staff would modify data? That should be a security concern. It goes a little bit outside the realm of things that we're thinking about, but it's still there. Bottom line is that, how do you know? That's going to be FDA's fallback question. How do you know? Every auditor on earth is going to come back to, okay, you gave me this. How do you know? Because I'm going to be asked how we knew, and you're going to be asked how we knew. So how do you know? That's going to be the fallback. So being able to understand how your data got to where it is and asking the hard questions, and where necessary, putting up a little bit more restriction or structure around where the data came from is critical. Plus, and I think this is going to be why we don't have that much of a drive to it. When we consider the AI boom, there's a lot of draw through language models about the cleanliness and authenticity of data. We also can see down the pipe into quantum. This is just going to get even worse. The big issue in hand is going to be data cleanliness. So I think that data cleanliness is going to kind of sweep data integrity along with it. That's a projection. I would look to the panel to tell me I'm wrong.
Not wrong, but I'd like to
Nobody can tell you.
add something. But I think the biggest point here is that the chain of custody of the information through its life cycle is the key point. It's always been the key point, right? Can you show that you can actually trust the data from where it started and to where it ends up? And understanding the data lineage, how it got through the different systems, has always been a requirement, but it really hasn't been something people have looked at in the past. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with Part 11. I think some of the examples you use in the back end are dated, and they don't maybe need to be modernized a bit so it's easier for people to understand. But the same idea of being able to show that you can show the data started out like this, it changed to this, this is who changed it and when I knew it, so I can have some trust in that or fidelity of that information, has always been the same. We may use different tools to do it, but it's the same concept. And people lose the fact that, oh, I've got a copy over here, it's great, it's working on this one machine. Awesome, how did I get from that machine over to my other network? Oh, somebody put it on another machine and massaged the data. Well, the term massaging the data brings up concerns about what did they do to it. If you can show what they did to it, you have transparency of what occurred, everybody's good. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with it. It's when you don't know what happened to it or it sits there and you can't find out where it came from where you have a problem. That's the piece that we need to focus on. And that's part of the data cleansing side. Cleansing is great as long as the cleansing doesn't change the intrinsic meaning of it. We need to make sure we're clear on both integrity and when you say cleansing, what do you mean by you're cleansing it? I think that's a key piece that's going to be throughout the life cycle of this as we go forward as well.
All right, I want to put a scenario out here. And I think many folks would probably want an answer to that. And I would like each one of you to really just contribute to it. The case is, I have an inspection coming in. All right, the FDA at the door, unannounced. I have a digital validation tool. We did not prepare for that audit. And now the auditor is asking, the usual questions. And at a point where 6 hours, whatever later, they're asking for documentation. You don't have any papers. Zero. It's all digital. What do you do? I can give some options.
Can I start with a comment first?
Sure, please.
If when the auditor comes into the building, that's when you start making a decision, you've made some bad life choices.
Okay, it's hypothetical.
First of all, yeah, no, I know it's hypothetical, but okay, so that I was asleep enough that I didn't do any pre-planning. I don't have a plan of where my procedures are. I don't have the document. I don't have my frequently asked questions already ready to go. I don't have my procedures already teed up and ready to piece of it. An auditor shows up at the door and go, what do we do next? That's your scenario?
Let's do it this way.
Okay.
Yeah, why not?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have a digital system. That's all you're gonna do. I guess.
Right.
My question is, do
Okay.
you turn? Do you give them the keys? Go ahead and look at everything. I guess I want to hear from you guys. What would you do in this situation? How would you provide evidence of your digital validation tool when they're inspecting a specific system?
So I would, I mean, just jumping in, I think, first off, I know where you're going is on direct access, and there was an EMA guideline that came out for computerized systems using for clinical trials. And in there, I think it's 411, they're saying you must give this full direct access to all relevant systems. So that's not just the validation tool, that's everything. So you need to be able to define what is relevant, and then what does full mean in that context. And then we even want access, if you read the document, for it'll go to even decommission system that you have to maintain access. I think that the point is relevant. Frankly, though, I think what drives that for me will be, what does the auditor want? To Roy's point, my system is good to go. I validated. I should, at this point in time, be ready. If someone's looking, yes, it's validated. I know the workflows. I know the rules. I know I have data integrity. Otherwise, I don't have a job right now. So at that point in time, if it's a paper on glass system, maybe the auditor will sit there and go like, yeah, I'm comfortable. Right? But if it's not, and it requires a learning curve like ALM, then to understand it, then maybe he wants us to show him. I would actually be open to say, which would you prefer? We have someone who can walk you through, so you don't have to spend time on the training and learning how to navigate. And if you look at the CPGs for inspections, it's like, do you have a process? Is this document? Is there evidence that it's followed? I don't think Daniel is going to want to spend a lot of time like getting trained up so he could just look at for evidence that we're following our process. So at that point in time, it would really be, what does the auditor want? Letting them drive it. But the bigger thing is that voice called out. I should not be in the point where I'm worrying about it. My system should have integrity. My CSA program should have a rationale and a framework and a structure, and I should have that confidence at that point in time. Besides that, it's whatever Daniel wants.
Yeah, and to that point, I think I would say is that it should be a guided tour through the system. Like, you're not going to just say, here's the keys, go look at it, because they're going to have a learning curve as an inspector to figure out how to get through the process. You can say and walk them through the process and show it to them, because there's no reason to not have transparency to show it to them, but you need to be able to show it to them in the context that a person would be using it, because not all systems are created the same, not exactly the same, interface steps. We all have different interpretations, we all different procedures. I don't think any of the auditors have enough time to sit there and learn 26 different SOPs and procedures to get trained up to be able to do a certain role. They want to know, do we have a control around it? Do our people know what they're doing? And can we see the evidence? That's a guided tour. That's not a self-regulated, here, you're in a new country, go figure out what's going on. They want to see where the mile markers are. Now, with the ability to go, I don't want you just to guide me just this one thing. I want to see something else. Yeah, you should be able to drive there, but that's understanding the design of the systems well enough to be able to navigate with the auditor where they want to go. That's fine.
All right.
So I think just to add in, I think the thing that the wrench there is full direct read-only access. That's the expectation from Europe. That's not a guided tour anymore. They want the ability to go in. Now, to your point, Roy, I said you need access. We need to do that. You need to know how to navigate. It's read-only, so they're not going to muck anything up. But you need to be prepared for that question. Right. And then I don't think everyone's really going to want to do that. If they want, I mean, frankly, they'll slow them down. Right.
Yep.
So since I might have an answer, I'll throw it in here. If you find yourself in the scenario that Khaled has opened, there is a callback 30 years ago to when the regulation was first put in place. And that was that even if you don't have a procedure for something, you may still be technically capable to do it. You may get an observation that you don't have a procedure, but that's hardly something that prevents you from making your product. So if we're in the middle of a scenario like this, and you're able to technically demonstrate proficiency with your system, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. So both, whether you go in with read-only access or you're able to sit down and drive them through the system and understand, and as the investigator or auditor asks questions, you're able to answer it. You may get an observation that you didn't have documentation that supported it, but that is going to come with a, look, they know what they're doing, it just wasn't written down. And that is far less impactful than they didn't have a procedure and they didn't know what they were doing. That hurts a lot more. So yes, I mean, it's not entirely a loss. Of course, you're probably in the scenario you conjure, you're going to get an observation on something. So it's better to demonstrate technical capability and the ability to protect patients by providing a good product that works through a system that you have thoroughly vetted, that you just don't have docs for, than it does for, okay, we're going to set everything up, but we're making product that we don't understand. It's just a miracle occurred, and now we have what we need.
Thank you. Awesome. Great. So the verdict then, a guided, will actually walk through the inspector. Okay, that's perfect. I think we've got maybe about 7 minutes or 8 minutes. If there is no other questions, I don't see any questions in the. Sorry,
there's a couple of questions in the chat that maybe we can go through one or two.
Yes, please. I do not see them though. If you can help us out.
There's a questions tab.
Yeah, there's one that says, I can just say it out loud. It's
Sure.
Will the FDA update their guidance for industry and FDA staff document, last updated January 2002, anytime soon or ever? Consider the ever-changing technology. I'm surprised we aren't getting more official direction on Part 11 compliance.
So I cannot answer that, as that is a agency-wide document. Can I say that it's worth looking at? I will simply say, at least as far as Part 11 goes, it's kind of a sleeping dog. For the most part, nothing has really challenged the core tenets of it at this point. It's settled into a peaceful medium with enforcement discretion as identified. The signature authorities still need to be understood and known. And there hasn't been a hue and cry against the agency to update it. So for the most part, people are more focused on the newest, latest, greatest technologies than they are on updating that. As I mentioned earlier, does that mean that it wouldn't be worth a discussion? I believe it could be, but I'm one voice in a sea of 20,000 people, and all of them have a different take on whether or not we need to approach that particular subject.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions, Julian?
Yeah, I see one. It's a two-part question from a CSV perspective. Is design review DR based on DR protocol mandatory? And number two is from a CSA perspective also, to what extent should we manage documentation, example, test and evidence for unscripted testing?
Okay.
So I'm gonna be sure, because on the first part was, is design review mandatory?
Based on DR protocol mandatory.
Based on.
Yeah. Do you mind, Julian, repeating the question, please? The first part.
Yeah. From a CSA perspective, is design review DR based on DR protocol mandatory?
Design review will be mandatory regardless. Design review is not a function of anything that falls into CSA, that's an 82030 requirement, at least within the realm of devices. That's a fundamental. So that's not going to change. Now, what you need to do for a design review will be dictated by the risks inherent and such. But since design review for most of the things involved at that stage are going to be product centric, it's all going to be high risk for CSA. And that's why I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but that's a yes in every scenario, unless I'm missing something.
I'm not sure, but it might mean the fact that not all design reviews are created equal, depending on the nature of what you're design reviewing. And
That's true,
what you're looking
especially
at.
if you have a design review for a software-based device. Like if your device is software. If your device is software, then CSA doesn't apply. That is explicitly exempted from the discussion. If it's software within a device, it is exempted from the discussion. CSA does not apply, because always and it will always considered to be a patient risk, high process function. Full stop.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Roy. Did you need to add?
No, that's good. I was just going to say that what I was saying is that the design review of a non-product piece of software where you're doing a simple lookup to a table to get a value is a lot different than a design review of a machine learning algorithm that is got 25 different subcomponents. You're still going to do a design review. One's going to be a really simple one, and one's going to be a more detailed, complex one based on the nature of the solution. That's all I was getting at. So they're not. I don't know the specific intent of the question, but that's what I was saying. All design reviews are not created equal. So.
All right. Any other question? Julian?
I think if we can answer this one quickly and then do closing, Khaled.
Sure.
Yeah, the last question is, do we need Part 11 e-signature for URS FSTS?
Functional technical specification.
I think that depends on your system. It really depends on, is it necessary or not? Really, some applications just don't have it, and it's not necessary. It really goes back to, what is your predicate rule? Do you need that signature for something to prove something? And that's fundamentally where it goes.
Right. So there's two parts to that, I think. One is based on the intended use of the tool. Would it have needed a signature before it was digital? If it needed one, then it still needs one now. The other flip side of that is, if you're talking about, should you sign off on your requirements to know that everybody agrees with the requirements? Yes, you absolutely should. And if you're doing it in a digital system, it should be a compliant signature.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Agree.
Awesome. All right, then let's wrap it up, and we'll just go starting with Margie. Any last advice, comments to the attendees will be much appreciated.
I really don't have much else to add. What are the regulations? Just get extended into what the new technology is. The fundamentals are there. They're written very broadly, and you do need to be aware of what's there, and they do extend into the new technologies. And you just got to learn what the new technologies are, and think creatively as well as critically.
Thank you. Roy?
Basic data integrity and eugenic custody hasn't changed, never will. As Margie said, learning the new technology is an important part. The other piece I would just say, though, is as part of the topic of this, is getting ready for the inspection doesn't happen the day the inspector gets there. You should have a clear plan of what are the questions they're always going to ask about the system, know where they are, and make sure that people are trained enough to know where to go to find the information if they have to. An immediate answer is not necessarily a good answer. Make sure you know how to get to the right information versus just trying to respond in a knee-jerk reaction to say, auditor asked a question, I must answer within 5 minutes. No. Auto ask a question, understand the question, get to the right people, and get them the right data. And if you've practiced that before they show up, it's a much easier process.
Agree.
Thank you. Ken?
Yeah, just to add on, you just need to understand your own processes. If you're going to go, we're talking about what. At one point, there's a tooling to make sure the tool is fit for purpose, and then I can trust the integrity and I can trust the integrity of the process. If you're overlaying the CSA aspects of it, you need to be able to have the confidence that you can justify and you can explain it. The state of it, what is your rationale? Why did you make the decision? Whether that's driven by tables, whether it's driven by critical thinking, you should have a sound methodology, a sound understanding. Ideally, you have metrics behind it. I used to work for a CRO in the clinical division, and people will come in there with, they didn't like our methodology, and I would just sit there and they'd write me up, and I said like, hey, it works for us. I've got the metrics to show that it works. And that was the end of the discussion. I was like, no, I'm not going to change my procedure for you. So if you have that confidence in your system and the understanding and the confidence that it works, you're in a good spot. And to really, your systems need to be ready to go. And with that the GCP side of the world saying that they want full direct access and